Okay, so today I wanted to talk a little bit about rollers. I feel like I can give some insight. I throw a lot of rollers. It's one of my favorite shots to throw. Talk a little bit about what kind of discs I use for rollers, talk about the shots I use and why I use rollers, maybe more than a lot of other people. So first and foremost, let's talk a little bit about terminology. So I've got basically three terms that I use to describe what a roller is doing. So that's cut, straight, and curl. Cut is basically the disc leaning into the side opposite the flight plate. So on a right-hand backhand throw, if I'm looking at the disc is going to be leaning to the left. Straight is just straight up and down, as opposed to an air shot where straight is going to be flying flat. And then curl is where the disc moves toward the flight plate. So most of the time it's leaning that way, and that's the direction it finishes. So in talking about the types of shots you can hit with a roller, it's important to talk about which discs I use for what angles and for what type of rollers. So I'm going to demonstrate real quick. I'm going to show three different discs. So I have a Roadrunner that I use for shots that I either, if I put them down on cut, that I want them to curl very hard to the right. If I put the Roadrunner down almost straight, then it's going to pull very hard to the right. It's good for hitting corners and stuff like that. A neutral disc, which in my case I use a neutron octane. I find that when I put it down on a lot of cut, it'll hold that cut for the most part, but then it'll finish onto the flight plate. It'll finish with that curl. And then for a shot that I put down almost straight, I can get a lot of distance because it holds that neutral angle for a long time. And then eventually it will finish curl on the right. And then for an overstable shot, I use a PD2. If I were to hit that thing on cut, it'll hold cut the entire way. You can use that to create a right to left shape shot, me as a right-hand backhand thrower. And then if I were to put that disc down straight, the disc will basically go and hold cut, and then it'll eventually fade out, but it's kind of almost 50-50 whether it'll actually do that or not. So want to address how to use rollers. So first and foremost, most of the time I'm using a roller to try to take out bushy trees, low ceilings, shots where I'm going to be obstructed and where the ground is open. This is really great in settings like park golf, or if you're on a golf course where you'll have big thick trees and you can just ride right under them with a roller. Use rollers to get out of trouble a lot. So forehand roller is a really great shot. It's pretty easy to execute. And as long as you get the angles right, you can you can get back onto a fairway, line your disc up with the fairway, even if you're coming almost perpendicular to it if you're stuck in some trouble. You can also get some angles that you can't hit with air shots. So for example, if I were to take my Roadrunner, my understable disc, and put it on a lot of cut, I can get it to cut, pull to the left, and then turn over to the right and finish right. So it's like an S curve, but you can do things that are really tight in a way that you just can't do with an air shot very easily. You can do other things like staying safe from fences or thick brush. So there's a couple of holes that I play a roller specifically because there's a fence on the right, and I want to make sure that my mistake is to just hit the fence as opposed to going over it, which is I've seen happen way too often. And then the other thing you can do with rollers is you can actually maximize your distance. So you've seen Eagle McMahon lay down just absolutely massive rollers in places like Portland where the grass is short and the disc just stands up and rides and rides and rides. And you can get distances that you just cannot get with an air shot. A roller uses all the energy of the disc and finishes by ending with basically zero energy. It falls on its back. Where an air shot, even when the air shot lands on the ground, even if you've gotten a perfect flight out of it, it's still spinning. It's still moving forward, which means the disc still has energy that hasn't been tapped into. So let's talk a little bit about what affects how a roller curls, because every disc, it's just like the equivalent in an air shot. Every disc wants to finish hyzer. Well, in a roller, every disc wants to finish with curl. So the first thing is the ground hardness. So if you have really soft ground or thick grass, for example, that's going to slow the disc down very quickly, and it's going to make it hold cut, actually. So it's not going to want to curl as fast. Hard ground, something like concrete or compacted dirt, is going to make the disc act less stable. It's going to make it want to curl faster. So if you're throwing on hard ground, you're going to want to throw a more stable disc because the disc is going to want to curl harder. If you're throwing in grass, if you're throwing on softer dirt, on sand, or something like that, you're going to want to throw a less stable disc because it's going to hold cut easier. Wind, so in headwind is going to do the exact same thing that it would with an air shot. It's going to make your disc less stable. So by less stable, I mean it's going to want to pull curl a lot faster. With a tailwind, it's exactly the opposite. So it's going to hold that cut, basically just like an air shot where it will hold that hyzer angle. It's not going to pop up and turn like an air shot. Moisture is going to slow your disc down, so it's also going to make it more stable. So I've thrown discs where I am sure it's going to stand up and I forget that it's an early morning and there's dew covering the grass, and it slows the disc and it makes it cut very hard, and I end up in a spot that I completely hadn't planned on. And then as far as the disc type goes, most of the time, if I'm throwing off the tee, I'm going to throw a fairway or I'm going to throw a distance driver, just because I'm going to be trying to get distance. I find that if I'm pulling out a putter to scramble with, it's just for that. It's just for scrambles. So putters obviously are not going to roll as far as a distance driver. That distance driver, just that sharp edge, the blade that's just barely touching the ground, is going to allow it to roll very far, very easily. It's something you can use to your advantage. And then, again, putters for little scramble shots, 60, 80 feet out, and I just want the disc to slow down as it gets toward the basket, I'm going to pull out a putter. If I need something to go or something to even hold cut, I find that fairways and distance drivers are better at that overstable cut than a putter. I'm not 100% sure why, but that's just my experience. So what about how they compare to air shots? So obviously rollers have some advantages and some disadvantages. Biggest advantages are you get to mitigate tree foliage, low ceilings, and you can maximize distance. So throwing that max distance line, you actually don't put the roller on the ground quickly. You're going to launch it into the air, get it to pan a little, hit the ground, and so basically you've gotten the benefit of the air shot. You get it to travel through the air without the same amount of friction as on the ground, and then you get it to roll and use the remainder of its energy on the ground. So that's how you maximize your distance. You can cut really sharp corners with a roller. So whether you need to pull to the right, whether you need something that is going to finish with cut, right? You can do that with a roller in a way that you just can't with an air shot. And then scrambling, you don't need a lot of room to swing. If you're just throwing a forehand roller, all you need is just a little bit of space. You can pop one out with just the flick of your wrist. It's a pretty easy shot to hit. So disadvantages to air shots, obviously, it can be hard to control the distance. So with an air shot, you can play into the ground as a stopping point. Rollers are just going to keep going. So unless you're hitting something, they're going to just continue rolling. So that's the one trick I've had with scrambles is I'll throw a roller and it'll just go sailing by the basket. And yes, I'll get out of trouble. Yes, I'll give myself a putt, but it's now a 60-foot putt, where if I can get an air shot there, I can get that better distance control. Rollers are very susceptible to stuff on the ground, obviously. So sand, rocks, roots, snow, little tufts of grass have stopped my rollers dead in their tracks. So you have to be judicious when deciding what kind of roller and how you're going to throw it down. Angle control. So in the air, you're only susceptible to the air. So as long as you play the wind right, you can get your angles, you can hit them in a pretty reliable way. Well, on the ground, you can hit hard ground and then you can hit something soft and you can start to cut too much. I mean, it's very dependent on what's on the ground. So again, this is why stuff like a ball golf course is great for throwing rollers, because the ground is manicured. It's very clean. You're not going to see roots. You're not going to see just random patches of sand traps, obviously, but you can play them in a way that you just can't on a lot of disc golf courses. So another thing to keep in mind. And then one of the biggest things is wind. So rollers are fantastic when there's no wind. When you've got a cross breeze, that cross breeze can push on the side of the flight plate. You can end up in all kinds of different places because even a light breeze will push on the entirety of the disc face. Where when you're throwing flat, you'll never have a wind that's almost never have a wind that's coming straight down or straight up on it. But when you're on the side, you'll have winds that come straight to one side or the other, and they will push that disc and influence its behavior. Something you'll notice is that if you're throwing a flick roller, for example, and that wind comes pushing it almost kicks the bottom out, and the disc wants to tilt more into that despite being pushed this way. So it's just kind of it's weird behavior. It's stuff that just requires practice. Again, that's how you get good at rollers. That's how you get good at anything. But hopefully this at least gives you an idea of what kind of discs and how to throw them. You can really use any disc for rollers in general. I really like to use a few specific ones. I have kind of 3 drivers. I have my Roadrunner, I have my Octanes. I have 2 different Octanes that I basically will throw either max distance rollers or just neutral rollers with, and then a PD2 if I want to hold cut. On flick rollers, I usually will throw a PD or a Fireball. Then when getting out of trouble, I'll usually, if I'm going short, I'll throw a Zone or I'll throw my MVP Ohm. Those seem to do pretty well for most of my purposes. So I hope that's helpful. I hope that gives you at least a baseline for what different discs will do for rollers, and good luck out there.